to welcome Courtland Kilpatrick to the show today. We title the show Entrepreneurs, Business, and Finance. Courtland is a good friend of mine, has become over the last 5 years. We met 5 years ago through business. Thank you for coming on. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's been crazy. It's been 5 years already.
I know.
Yeah.
It's not possible, actually, how old I am. So
Yeah.
we won't talk about that. I'm really a lot younger.
Yeah, well, I think we both aged a few in 5 years. See, my son, my gosh, I think I just had my son, my first one, when you and I met. So that's kind of crazy. It's been 5 years plus.
Uh, Well, it's been a
Yeah.
good 5 years. There's always challenges, but it's been a good 5 years. So we worked together, and we first met through business. And you are an expert in many things oil and gas, but particularly a specialty in mineral properties and mineral rights. And
Yeah.
I think that was a chosen decision because you like that space. Because um, drilling requires a lot of moving parts, and royalties is a I don't want to say it's simpler because it's very complicated, but doesn't require as much of a team of people doing a lot of work and a lot of contractors behind you.
Yeah.
So, can you tell me what you think first interests you in mineral properties?
Sure. Well, a little background first. So I didn't start out in minerals. I started out in title, running title. Um, But what I saw in mineral properties was very similar to what I like in real estate, basically. It's owning a tangible asset, or I mean, tangible, whereas in someone's going to pay you for basically owning an asset. Um, what I just saw when we were running title, I first started running title and taking leases, and that's where it really kind of piqued my interest because I'd be going to these individuals for a company at that time when I started was Chesapeake. And I realized that just because this individual owned the minerals in any particular property, I'd go and have a blank check in hand to negotiate just the opportunity for Chesapeake to look for oil and gas in under their property. I just thought that was a really cool thing. Like they didn't have to do anything at all. And basically they would get a 20, 30, $130,000 check and they had zero liability on their part. And basically they were taking a Fortune 500 company and coming and saying, look, you've got to pay me for something that I own, but literally have no means whatsoever to get it out of the ground otherwise. I found that fascinating.
Yeah, so and you've always had a passion for it, and of course, it's my dad used to always say, pick a profession, pick a work that you enjoy, and it's obvious that you do, and it's interesting every day. It's never a dull moment. Um, so let's
Yeah,
talk about that. Talk about how Chesapeake is a major international, well, I guess national, but publicly traded company. And when they want to drill wells, they need to go lease property, but they have to lease it from someone who owns the property. Lease is just a term that allows them to contract with that landowner to go ahead and drill the well.
correct.
Um, and but the person that owns the what we call mineral properties or mineral rights, the underground property, uh, gets paid a royalty when the oil and gas company drills and produces, because it wouldn't be fair if you own some property and some big company comes and drills on your property and they don't pay you for it. It's like if someone wants to come ranch on your property, they pay you for it. If they want to come farm on your property, if they want to lease your property. So it's kind of the same way. It starts with the landowner and the oil and gas company pays it. So talk about how the rights can be severed and what it's like to own an underground property and how that's recorded.
Sure. Let's see. Simplicity for simplicity purposes, there are two types. There are real property, which I mean, people can call it different things, and for all intents and purposes, real property is simply just you own the surface of the property and all the minerals to the center of the earth. You can sever those ties in multiple different ways, but again, simplicity purposes, let's just say that Joe Blow owns real property, which is surface level and below. This was, Joe Blow's grandfather bought the land 100 years ago. So now Joe says, "Hey, I need some cash for my family. Above surface, I have a farm and it's making some money, but I had someone come by and say, "Hey, look, I'll pay you X amount of dollars per acre that you own underneath your family farm." At that point, Joe says, "Sounds like a deal," and he negotiates a 10,000 per acre. And from that point on, Joe has nothing affecting his farm above the surface. And now whomever bought below the surface now has the rights to negotiate a lease from an oil and gas company. And they've got those rights all the way to the center of the earth. Going back to why that's so interesting is I believe I believe the United States is the only the only place that you can actually own the minerals.
That's right too. The history, I believe, and it may not be solidly established, but is that Rockefeller had something to do with it, that he was drilling wells when wells were first being drilled, and it didn't make sense to, and there was value of what was underground. It didn't make sense to have buy the house and the ranch and everything with it when the people that owned the house and the ranch didn't want to sell it, but they might want to sell a portion of what they own underground or all of what they own underground.
That sounds
And
correct.
and so when you say run title, that's important because it's not very easy if you're not an expert. There aren't title companies. And if you're not an expert, obviously you were working for a huge company, and that's part of how you became an expert. Now you've been working uh, for yourself, if you will. We work together, but for many years. How is it that you find out who in the heck owns the minerals, and how do they get recorded, and how do you know when you own them?
Well, okay. Again, everything in oil and gas is somewhat complicated. So I'm going to try to narrow it down to the least complicated way possible. So depending on the state, every state's different. So each state has its own rules, regulations, ways to find who owns the minerals. But let's just we specialize in Oklahoma, for instance. I started running title in Texas, but that's a completely different animal than Oklahoma, which is a completely different animal than West Virginia, which is a completely different animal than Louisiana. So, for all intents and purposes, let's just focus on Oklahoma. No, so Oklahoma, every every piece of property in the United States, think of it as one large jigsaw puzzle. At one point, everything was owned by the United States government, way, shape, form, or fashion. Then every piece of property within a state was then basically owned by that state at a certain point. Now, this gets a little mismatched, but I'm again trying to make it as simple as possible for explanation's sake. So, what you'd have to do is go back to when the state of Oklahoma or the United States government, depending on what territory, what region, actually gave a piece of land to a sovereign individual. Um, in Oklahoma, a lot of that was to Indian tribes. There are large swaths of Oklahoma that you can see if you go back into title, and what you say you go back to patent. Patent is where the United States and or the state in which you reside or are looking for the minerals actually gives it to one individual. So what's interesting about Oklahoma is you will see, on a lot of the old patents, red feather. The state of Oklahoma, United States government grants 160 acres to red feather and buffalo hump, if you will. Um, so at that point, there is there's a lineage of your property, if you will, from red feather to buffalo hump to flying eagle, and then I mean these are real names. I mean on patents, and then at some point those Indian tribes start selling out portions of their land. And so then you start seeing more of the, John Smiths, if you will, that start buying it up. So again, very long story short, it starts at a point that's patent. And every mineral exchange that goes from patent forward, it might start out with 160 acres. And by the time it gets to us in 2024, that 160 acres might be owned by 350 people. So the original question was title. So the difficulty in title is every time that there's a marriage, every time that there's a divorce, every time that there's a death, there has to be a chain of title connected to your property. That's how operators know who to pay, basically. So specifically in Oklahoma, you have to go to a courthouse or a title company that houses a bunch of the records for different counties. And quite simply, you have to hire a landman, and that landman goes through and runs the records from patent forward. They then develop what's called a run sheet showing every document that would have affected your property from patent forward, leases, divorces, affidavits of heirship, wills, um, and then they will then put together what's called a MOR, a mineral ownership report, and that is your end of the puzzle. Here's your puzzle, the run sheet that might be 20 lines long or 250 lines long. And at the end, here's your mineral ownership report saying that whoever you're buying from Joe Blow. Joe Blow owns 22.3 acres at a 1/8 royalty interest. And at that point, now you know what to pay him to take possession of the property. So that's title in a nutshell, basically. Different states, it's completely different in every state. And I have horror stories about West Virginia. West Virginia, it's well, I won't get into it, but there are some states that are on top of it and some states that aren't on top of it. Oklahoma happens to be one that has great records. Texas, great records. Past that, a lot of other states just haven't really done as well, going back to patent, if you will.
And what you were saying earlier, run title, that's a description of what that means. It sounds like something easy, but it's really quite complicated and requires a lot of expertise.
Oh, it's extremely complicated. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's to make sure that get a property from someone that wants to sell it and can sell it because they actually own it. Sometimes they don't
Absolutely.
know they own it. Sometimes they think they own it and they don't own it. There's all sorts of confusion out there.
Yeah, there,
And
there are clauses out there, Mother Hubbard clause, there are favorization clauses. There are, I mean, a ton of legal mumbo jumbo that you've got to know and be able to look for. The Duhigg rule is a big one where someone can't sell more than they have. And if they do, then it has to come out, there's 1,000 rules, but yeah, the very basics of it was the title report, but getting that title report and knowing how to actually interpret the title report or put together a title report is extremely difficult. Yeah.
and many times, more recently, some of the documents are computerized, so you can actually look it online. But I don't think there's a state that I'm aware of where it goes back to the beginning. So ultimately, it still requires, at least in Oklahoma for sure, and Texas, someone to go to a county courthouse where these deeds and ownership are recorded and verify everything. And it's they're scattered around frequently in the country, and um, there's interesting stories when there's a rush on a certain area of landmen getting into it, trying to get the title book,
Oh,
from the other one first and wait in
yeah.
line.
Yeah,
So
you wait line. The worst I've waited in line, I waited for 3 days to where the company that was hiring me had to put me up in a hotel for 3 days to wait for the courthouse in question was up in West Virginia, and there were only three um, microfilm machines.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you had 50 people waiting, you just had to wait your turn until the person in front of you got finished. And so yes, you're 100% correct on that.
So, well, never a dull moment. Um, and opportunity for the people that want to sell that maybe have a point in their life where they're ready to sell, divorce, death, maybe they want to cash in on some of the royalties that they own. And that's the thing, the owner gets paid a royalty. And a royalty is a wonderful thing because you don't have, at least in Oklahoma, don't even pay any property taxes. So
Mhm.
you get paid a percentage of the revenue. Um, well, why don't we wrap up? Because one of the things that I think is interesting, many things that I think is interesting about you and I respect you for is uh, when you were in college, at a good college, uh, Texas Christian University here in Fort Worth, TCU, you were inspired to enlist in the military uh,
Mhm.
and in Iraq with real fighting, real
Yeah.
weapons, real war,
Yeah.
and you did that. You came back home, you finished college, and you started your more traditional career. I know that I've never noticed it, but you've shared that you were fortunate because you did see people with some serious injuries, but you have one ear that you don't hear as well in from the explosions. Um, that one there, and so thank you
Got
for
hit got hit by a Soviet style mortar exploded about 20 feet to my left, and so yeah, that knocked about anywhere between 40 and 45% of my hearing out of my left ear. But past that, I'm all right coming home with only that. I'll put it that way. Yeah.
um, I know you saw some things that probably aren't appropriate to share, but it's war is a gruesome thing, and it's going on a lot in the world right now. But I'm glad we have patriots like you that are willing to protect this country.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, it was a pretty interesting. I actually transferred in. Well, how I got into it would be a very long story, but 10,000 foot view. Speaking of patriots, I wouldn't have got in without a couple of patriots that I knew and really admired. Um, I transferred up. I went to. I had okay, 10,000 foot view. Quick story: how I got there in the first place. I was planning on going to TCU, and I just so happened to get a full ride scholarship up in Tulsa. Um, and my parents said, "Look, things are expensive. Why don't you go ahead and take that full ride scholarship up there in Tulsa? I know you don't want to go, but go up there, and then we'll send you anywhere in the world. Hell, if you want to go to Hawaii University for 2 years, we'll pay for it. But your senior year's on you." I said, "Okay, sounds like a great deal." Did my time in Oklahoma, came back TCU. When I came to TCU was my first semester I got to TCU was when 9/11, and that affected obviously everything around the United States. Um, so my family was a military-ish family. My father was in the Navy. My half brother was a Marine. I had a nephew that was a Marine, and but I never really always appreciated the military, and but just never really thought that was my place. I was like in college and this, that, and the other. Well, anyway, long story short, my senior year rolled around, and I saw the tuition it was going to cost me at TCU, which was cheaper then, but not cheap. And I said, "Well, man, I don't know what I want to do." And so I took a semester off, drove around a little while with my girlfriend at the time, and ended up back at the family ranch. Was working out in the ranch and happened to come in about 15 minutes earlier than normal, and saw a general on the TV, and he was basically lamenting that every generation, had their challenges, wartime, and mine at the time was not stepping up. There were lack of people joining, and that just kind of ate at me. I kind of laid in bed that night thinking, well, I'm able-bodied. I'm not in school right now. I took a semester off. Don't have family, and I thought, I'm going to go down to the recruiting office tomorrow and just inquire. Met a guy there that was an old World War II guy that was just happened to be in the office, and he was just telling me about his life experiences after the military and kind of all of the positives that came with it. I mean, he didn't hold back with the negatives. Also, I mean, he saw a lot of fighting in World War II. Um, but anyway, long story short, I joined up, went home, told my parents. They looked at me like I, had a horn growing out of my forehead. But it was a good experience. We lost a lot of people. I say a lot of people. We lost a few people in our company. We lost our captain, Captain James A. Funkhauser. We lost our interpreter. We rolled into Baghdad Christmas Eve of '05. We're there a year, and came back a couple men lighter a little before Christmas '06. But nutshell, military experience. Um, I wouldn't take anything back. War, there's terrible things happen in war. But overall, it was a positive experience for me, with discipline and a lot of things that I was probably lacking. So there's my 10,000 foot, military story.
What a fantastic 10,000 foot military story. And I think that is a terrific note, inspiring note to leave off on. So thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day to get on the show. And I will be talking to you soon.
Absolutely. Appreciate the opportunity.